Welcome back to the Scotti-BYTE channel, and this is Scott. I want to talk about how to create a faster QNAP Windows 11 virtual machine. So QNAP Virtualization Station is used to create virtual machines. Unlike LXD and Container Station on QNAP, which uses pre-built Linux images, VMs require you to go through a normal operating system installation process. LXD only supports Linux, and so Windows must be installed inside of a virtual machine. We are going to learn how to create a Windows 11 virtual machine in Virtualization Station on QNAP, and also to make it a little bit faster. So let's go see how to do this, and also how to make your Windows 11 VM faster. So here we are in my lab QNAP NAS, and if I launch Virtualization Station, you can see that I have a Windows VM, and this is a Windows 11 VM that I created previously. If I click on this, it will open another tab for Virtualization Station. I can hide the controls here by simply hitting the sidebar button, and I can also hit F11 to make this go full screen. So now that it's full screen in my web browser, I'll go ahead and type in my password. And now I'm logged into my Windows 11 virtual machine. So I'm going to go up to this PC, and I'm going to do Properties. And you can see that it is device name is Scott-Win11, and it says Opteron 22XX Gen 2 class Opteron. That's just because that's the emulation I chose. We're going to look back at that to see how that was created, and basically we've got this here. So now if I go ahead and bring up something like File Manager in Windows, you notice it comes up really quickly. You'll also notice that if I bring up a web browser and I go to my favorite website, which is Scotti-BYTE.com, it also goes to it pretty quickly as well. And if I right click on this PC and I go to Manage, it brings up the management window, which usually takes a while anyway. If I drag the window around, there's a little bit of spottiness, but it's really not all that bad. And if I go down here and click on Device Manager, you can see that there are no exceptions to installed drivers. But the one thing I want to draw your attention to is if we look at disk drives, we click on disk drives down here. If I can click on it, my cursor's not showing up properly. Okay. We have a Red Hat VirtIO SCSI disk drive. And under display adapters, I have the Red Hat QXL controller. And under network adapters, I have the Red Hat VirtIO Ethernet adapter. And all of these things are really important to use the VirtIO drivers that come from Red Hat in order to speed your Windows experience under a Windows 11 VM implemented in KVM. And that's exactly what Virtualization Station is. So here we are back at Virtualization Station, and if I click up here, we get all of the controls, and we can go to the gear, and we can go to Settings, and you will notice that under Network, I'm using the VirtIO driver for my connection. And if we go under Video, you can see that I'm using the QXL driver. This will become important later. And under Storage, I am using the VirtIO driver, and I have cache mode set to write back. So let's go create a new virtual machine by clicking the Create command in Virtualization Station, and I'm going to call this one Win-11-test. And I'll simply say Windows 11 test VM. And so it's going to be a Windows machine, and we're going to default to Windows 11. You can see we have lots of choices. The newest patch of Virtualization Station supports Windows 11. And then here on boot firmware, we're going to have UEFI as the default as opposed to legacy BIOS. And then I'm going to go ahead and give it 4 CPU cores just because I can. And I'm going to give it 8192 megabytes of memory, which is 8 gigabytes because we know Windows loves memory. And then I'm going to click on Browse, and I'm going to go to Container Station, and I have a copy of my Windows 11 ISO up here. So you would have had to have previously downloaded the Windows ISO and put it on your system. You can use the distro creator in an existing Windows 11 to do this, or there are other ways to get it. I'll leave that up to you. So then we want to create an image for the disk, and I'm going to go ahead and put my image inside of Container, and I have a directory called Virtual Machines, and I'll go ahead and create it inside of that because that's where I put all my virtual machine images. I'm setting it up to be 250 gigabytes, which is their default, and I'm going to my main network. Here we have a choice of your other network interfaces that you have on your QNAP, and if you have only one, it'll list only one. So then I say OK. It goes ahead and creates that virtual machine called Win11 Test. And I want to draw your attention to, if we go down and click on the gear and we click on settings and we go look at network, you can see that the network is an Intel gigabit Ethernet as opposed to being VirtIO, but that's because VirtIO drivers are not built into the Windows installation disk. And if I go under storage, the same thing is true. It's using the IDE interface as opposed to VirtIO, and I can't pick VirtIO because it doesn't have the VirtIO drivers on the installation disk again. And the same can be true of the video. I could choose QXL, but I'm going to leave it at VGA for right now. So that being the case, I can go back to Overview. I can click on the Windows 11 Test VM. So to install Windows, I'm going to click the Start command here to start up the VM. And first I'm going to get a press any key to boot from CD or DVD, which I went ahead and did. And it'll have somewhat lengthy process to read in the CD-ROM and to begin the setup process. Now that the setup has begun, I'm going to go ahead and retract the control panel on the side. I'm going to click Next to continue. Click Install Now. I'm not going to put in a product key right now. I'll worry about that later. And I'm going to say I want Windows 11 Pro. I click Next. I accept the terms of the license agreement. I click Next again, and I say Custom Install Windows Only, and I'm going to completely allocate the disk, which remember was a 250 gigabyte virtual disk. So I click Next here, and Windows begins to copy its files. Choosing United States in my particular case. So we'll go ahead and type in Win11-test. So here I am finally booted up at the Windows 11 startup page. And if I right click on the background and go to display settings, you'll notice that the display settings are locked at 1280 by 720. Furthermore, if I go into Device Manager by clicking Start and going to Device Manager, you will notice that if I look at the disk drives, that I'm using the QEMU hard disk ATA device, and for display adapters, I'm using a Microsoft Basic Display Adapter, and for network adapters, it is using the Intel Pro 1000 network connection. And I want to be able to use the Red Hat VirtIO drivers to speed up all three of those devices and also allow for more customization. So in order to install the VirtIO drivers, the first thing I'm going to do is open my Edge browser, and I'm going to go to this GitHub page, which I will link in the show notes. And I'm going to click on latest VirtIO Win ISO file, and it will go and download that right now. And so that is only 507 megs, it looks like, and it has downloaded. So at this point in time, I'm going to exit Device Manager, go ahead and open Files Explorer. With any luck. Okay, it just took a while. That's one of the things that we're trying to improve the speed of that. There it goes. Okay, so I'll double click the VirtIO. I'll go ahead and open that file, and I'll go ahead and go down and execute the x64 since this is a 64-bit machine. So now I do a next. I accept the terms. I do next, another next, and install. And yes, I want to allow it. So now it's installing the Red Hat VirtIO Win drivers. Now that the drivers are installed, I click Finish, and it should require me to reboot even though it hasn't said so. So I'm going to come over here and click on Restart. So after having installed the MSI from the VirtIO ISO disk image, I discovered after multiple attempts that I still ended up with the Microsoft Basic Display Adapter. So it was useful to go through that process to see what you might run into. So my suggestion in the end is that instead you go and get the VirtIO Win guest tools and go ahead and install those, and you agree to the license terms, do an install here, say yes, it should go off and do the installation. Now that the installation of the guest tools is completed, if I go back into display adapters, you can see that we have the Red Hat QXL controller here. So now we can right button on the background, go into display settings, and I can now change my display settings to be 1920 by 1080, which is really what I wanted. And I'll say keep changes, and we can exit out of the settings. So you can see here that we now have our video working properly. So here we are back at the Virtualization Station control, and you can see that my hard disk drive is currently IDE. Now if we change this hard drive to be VirtIO, it'll actually crash, and the reason it'll crash is because the drivers haven't actually been installed on the system for it yet. So what we want to do is we want to add a device, and we're going to add another hard disk, and we're going to add a new VirtIO hard disk, and we'll just go ahead and put this in the same location, and it doesn't matter what size we make this. We could make it 10 gigabytes if we want to, And we'll just go ahead and say OK. And then we'll go ahead and reboot the machine at this point in time. And when we come back up, we should see that the VirtIO drivers are actually loaded. So here we are after the reboot in Device Manager. And if I look at my display adapters, you can see that I'm using the Red Hat display adapter. If you look at network devices, you can see that I'm using the Red Hat VirtIO Ethernet driver. And if you look at disk drives, you'll see that I have a Red Hat VirtIO SCSI drive, which is the new disk that I created. And my other disk, that is the system disk, is still the QEMU ATA device. So you had to add this new disk to actually make this happen, because it had to force loading the driver onto the Windows installation. So now what we're going to do is we're going to shut the system down again. And when we shut it down, we're going to go ahead and remove that drive since we no longer need it. But we're going to set the system drive now to be VirtIO, since the device drivers are now loaded on the Windows installation. So here we are back at Virtualization Station, and I'm going to change my main drive, main storage, to VirtIO, and I'm going to change my cache mode to write back. And then I'm going to hit an apply. And then I will remove this other hard disk down here by doing a minus there. And we've gotten rid of that hard disk. So now we only have well, I guess we haven't gotten rid of that hard disk. Let's see if we can remove this hard disk somehow. I guess we hit the X and it says, yeah, delete the hard disk image, and we're gone. So now we only have one drive, which is the primary drive. It's set to VirtIO and it's set to write back cache. So now we can go over here and restart our virtual machine. And now that we're booted back up, I'll type in my password. And we'll go ahead and go to Device Manager. Now, if we didn't add the other disk and we just tried to change our disk before we had the drivers on disk, it would just result in a blue screen. So that's the reason why we went through adding the other drive. So now you can see that this is using the Red Hat VirtIO SCSI driver for the disk. You can see that it is using the display adapter from Red Hat, and it is also using the network adapter for VirtIO. And as a consequence, when we launch things like our file manager and we bring up our menu and we even launch our Microsoft Edge, all of these things come up really fast. Go to my favorite website, Scotti-BYTE.com. Okay. And basically we have everything that we set out to do. So we now have a Windows 11 VM running in QNAP Virtualization Station using all of the VirtIO drivers. So in summary, there are some important facts that you should know about QNAP NAS systems. Virtualization Station is QNAP's implementation of KVM QEMU, which is the Linux virtualization hypervisor. Unlike a standard implementation of KVM, QNAP did not provide command line access to virsh and virt-install, which are core KVM commands that I've covered on the channel in the past. QNAP does not support the CLI, and yet the LXD CLI, which is the LXC command, works from the QNAP command line, as does the Docker command. The omission of KVM CLI access also means that QNAP does not support LXD virtual machines, which I've covered before on the channel. Container Station is an incomplete implementation of the LXD container standard. We can only hope that the future will bring Virtualization Station and Container Station integration, which means that KVM LXD integration will exist on QNAP NAS systems, which I believe is a really important feature. Anyway, that's it for today. Please subscribe and like to the channel, and don't forget to hit that notification bell, and we'll see you next time.